Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Randy Kearse. Today, my guest is Dr. Hart. How you doing, man?
Nice to be here, bro.
Listen, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to come to Straight Talk and talk about your book and talk about your journey and things like that. I'm going to jump right in it. You've written a wonderful book. You have a wonderful story. The title of your book, High Price. What does high price mean?
High price means multiple things. I mean, for me, it means that it's the price that I pay in order to be in the spaces in which I operate, like academia and the Ivory Tower and those kind of places. As you know, there's not many brothers who look like me in the Ivy League. And so the price that one pays in order to be there in those spaces, the price that I'm talking about is the price, the toll that is taken on me. Like I'm disconnected from my family back in Miami and so forth in this sort of journey, to struggle to go to be in these spaces. Heavy, heavy price. I wrote about it in the book. The price that the society is paying in terms of the way we deal with drugs is based on a lot of misinformation, a lot of hysteria. Taxpayers are paying a big price based on this misinformation. People who use drugs, people who get caught up in the system, the criminal justice system, the price they pay is heavy. And when people are paying a price, somebody is benefiting. But I talk about all of those sorts of things in the book, but that's where high price comes from. It's at multiple levels that people are paying a high price.
You're a neuroscientist. A lot of people probably don't even know what a neuroscientist is. Tell us what a neuroscientist is.
Quite simple. Neuro means brain. Scientists, of course, you study things. And so it's the person who studies the brain. In my case, I'm a neuropsychopharmacologist, so I study the effects of drugs on brain and behavior. And so, yeah, it's quite simple. I want to know how the brain works.
Why should people read your book?
Well, people should read my book if they care about American society, number one. How can we be better as a society, number one? And people should read my book if they want to know something about how do we bring about more justice for people. The book talks about race in America in ways that we are so uncomfortable in doing, particularly here in 2014. And it talks about drugs. If you want to have an education about how drugs work, what drugs do, what drugs don't do, read the book. You want to know something about how do you move people from spaces like where I grew up in the hood and projects and that sort of thing to being productive members of the society. The book will help you understand it. It's not that complicated. We pretend that it's complicated. And so if you care about this society, you care about poor people, people who have been voiceless, the book is certainly for you.
One thing I found fascinating about the book is you have a lot of people who use this moniker, I come from the hood, I grew up in the hood, but they don't have any connection to the experiences of what growing up in the hood is. I found that you really grew up in the hood, like you have those experiences. How were you able to articulate those experiences in a way that would make other people understand what it is like?
Well, you know, the thing about it, we think about the hood, the poor people. When we talk about the hood, I simply meant that I grew up in a poor community, poor black community that was isolated from mainstream for the most part. Grew up in the projects, housing projects. So that's all I mean when I say the hood. Now, what that means is what for many people is that you might have engaged in some behaviors that mainstream society might find unacceptable. I carried a gun at one point, I used drugs, sold drugs, those sorts of things. But the most important thing I hope people get from this is that many of the same principles that underlie my behavior or govern my behaviors are the same principles that governs the behaviors of people in mainstream. So when I think about where I'm currently at, an Ivy League professor, it is more vicious in my sort of circles today than it was in the hood. Because in the hood, one of the things that happens is that if you have a dispute, you have a slight, the outcome of that sort of competition or that slight is immediate. You kind of know. Whereas in the academy, the outcome is not immediate and people are less honest. And so they go behind your back and they do these evil, wicked things like cut off your career opportunities in ways that you don't even know you're in competition.
Wow.
So when we think about the hood, people think about the hood being so much more vicious. They are wrong. It's a hell of a lot more vicious in the academy when you have these smart people trying to cut you off at the knees.
Do you think that's what scares some people from wanting to reach those type of heights, of the fear of experience some of the things that you are talking about right now?
No, I don't think so. I think that if people had an opportunity or had more opportunities, they would try and want to be in these mainstream spaces. But society has put up barriers to ensure that some people are not in those spaces. And when I say some people, I mean, I think about my own, I speak from my own personal experience. Where I work, you know, was predominantly white. I mean, I think about publishing. I just published a book. It's predominantly white. I think about all of these spaces. There are reasons that these spaces are predominantly white. And it's not because brothers and sisters are like, yo, I don't think I want to participate in those. That's not the reason. I mean, so let's be clear that there are some societal barriers that are in place and that ensure that those spaces stay homogenous.
In your book, you talk about cultural capital, having it, not having it. Tell us what cultural capital means.
Cultural capital simply means that you kind of know what that culture responds to, what's important to that culture. So, for example, when I think about mainstream society, having an education from an Ivy League institution is important for a variety of reasons. If you're in the mainstream, you know what those reasons are. When I was in the hood, I didn't know the difference from Harvard to Broward Community College. You know, I didn't understand why it was important for someone to have an Ivy League degree versus a degree from Threadgill County Community College. I didn't understand what the difference was. So I didn't have that kind of cultural capital. But I certainly had cultural capital in the hood, in that I could tell you who had the best hookup. If you needed a VCR, I don't think people use those things anymore, but back in the day, if you needed a VCR, you knew you can go to your boy Bray Boy, because he had the hookup. You can get a VCR for $10, $20. Or if you needed to get like free cable, you knew that your boy Tony could hook you up with the cable. That's cultural capital in that environment. Whereas somebody not from that environment, that community, don't even know how to do these sorts of things. So cultural capital is those things that we all know, people who are in that culture kind of know, and other people outside don't know.
Well, one of the things that, from reading your book, you articulate this notion of acting white within our community. And I always thought it was just the fact that, you know, we use that term when people had an education or were being more educated than others, but you broke it down in a different way. Explain, what is acting white?
Yeah, one of the things that has been troubling me for the last 10, 15 years is the way I hear people, so-called educated folks, talk about what it means to be acting white. And they have this simplistic sort of analysis of what it means. So we say, like, oh, this person, they are shunned or ostracized in their community because they do well in school. And in that community, doing well in school means acting white. That's the stupidest. That's not right. I mean, acting white, what it really means is that when there are people, black people, for example, who think of themselves as being better than other black people simply because of something. It might be education, or it might be something else. And it's snobbery towards other black people in the hood. Because certainly when I was coming up, I mean, there were times, later in college and so forth, there were times when I was doing exceptionally well in school. And brothers and sisters and people, they'd say, right on, do your thing. They say that because they know that I'm not looking down on them, and that I am there to support what they're doing, and I'm a part of them, and I'm not embarrassed by being a part of that from where I came from. Whereas there are other folks who shun them and they try and move away, and they look down on people. That's the thing that people talk about acting white, because, you know, white folks historically in this country have looked down on black culture. Black culture wasn't valued. It wasn't seen as being as important in a lot of in many respects. I mean, you might remember in the 70s, even into the 80s, where we just, something as simple as music. You know, growing up in Miami, there was like one FM radio station for black people. And on all the other white stations, they didn't play black music. It wasn't valued. That's part of the culture. It wasn't, that's acting white. That's what we mean. You know, when you exclude black people or you shun black people, you look down on black people. Not the fact that somebody got an A. I mean, that's some simple, stupid stuff, you know?
How important is having a wide vocabulary?
Well, you know, one of the troubles with mainstream is this, is that if you can use big words or manipulate the English language, people think that you're smart. Again, that's stupid. But that's what mainstream think is smart and articulate, as they say. So unfortunately, people have to understand, people who are not in the mainstream culture, they have to understand some of these words just so you have this sort of form of communication to see what they value. But I hope people don't get it twisted because someone can use these big words and they think that they're smart. That's not being smart. I mean, being smart is being able to communicate in a variety of ways. You know, for example, if you are a physician and you have black patients and this person has anxiety, you know, this is what we call in medicine anxiety. But the person describes their anxiety as, you know, my nerves are bad. You know, in the hood, we say things like that. If that physician doesn't understand what my nerves are bad means, not a very good physician. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that people can understand a variety of sort of dialects, language, and so forth, even though it's English, you know, but you want to make sure that they understand all of these words. And so as part of my education, I was limited in that I didn't know what a lot of the mainstream words meant because we didn't use a lot of the mainstream words. So I had to learn them. But by that same token, people who have to learn these mainstream words, don't forget the words in the hood because that's so critically important to being able to understand a greater number of people and knowing a greater amount of various cultures. And so I don't want young cats who are watching this think like, oh, I have to speak like me or someone else. No, please hold on to the sort of the dialect and the vernacular that you're using, but also understand this other thing. But it's so important to continue that, to have that vernacular.
One of the things that I liked about your book and by meeting you and speaking to you is how down to earth you are. You have a lot of people who do become successful and reach a certain plateau in life and they just forget about where they come from. You don't, that's not the case with you.
Shit, I mean, I hope it's not the case with me. So I don't know really how that. I don't know how that could happen with me. I mean, one of the reasons that I continue to have my dreadlocks is, you know, it's spiritual in many respects. But I just don't want people to ever to get it twisted. You know, I had gold fronts. I still have the one. I mean, the gold fronts were damaging my dental sort of work, but I do these sorts of things to make sure that people don't get it twisted. You know, like on the one hand, people say things like, how'd you come from here in the hood and now that you're here as a professor at Columbia? And so people sometimes try to dichotomize me, and it's not that. I mean, I am still the person from the hood who just happens to be in my position where I'm at now. So that shapes my behavior today for better and for worse. But the thing is that, man, I'm proud to be from where I'm at. I mean, I'm proud of those people who raised me. I mean, they had so much soul. They have so much soul. They have so much heart caring about people. And so if I forgot or rejected who I was, I'm rejecting them. And that would be such a shame, particularly when I think about all of my heroes who were from the hood. Fannie Lou Hamer, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, all of those kind of people, you know, it's like they were from the hood. That's who I am.
When did you, I know from the book, but I'm going to ask you anyway, when did you like gain this sense of consciousness of what was going on in society as it relates to black people? And when you did become that conscious, like how did that impact your life?
Well, when we talk about consciousness, that's at multiple levels, you know. So coming up in a place where we were isolated from white folks, really, besides when they integrated the schools. When you come up in an exclusively black community, you know from the time you are a child that something ain't right about this society. When white kids get things that you can't get, you know this. So so that consciousness is, it's like breathing. It was always there. Oxygen was always there, and that's how that was. But that's on the one hand. But I never really knew exactly what was going on, like why this was the case, until I left Florida and went to the Air Force, and I went to England, and where the British were not bashful in criticizing the Americans for our race relations, our poor race relations. And here it was, an ally of the United States on their television shows. They were criticizing our sort of dealing with race. And that was sort of corroboration of my reality when I was back in Miami. And so it really gave me a desire to want to study this and learn more about this sort of thing. So that's like that's consciousness at another level. Mm-hmm. Try and figure out the mechanisms that are responsible for why some people are shut out and other people are not shut out. And my consciousness was mainly focused on race, like why are there so many black people who are unemployed relative to white people, all those kinds of things. But then another level of consciousness, I think about, well, damn, this is poor people in the United States, not only black people, but poor people. Poor people in the society is being shut out because, as you know, we have, for example, black officials. In fact, the President of the United States is black. We have these sorts of folks, but yet and still, poor people are being shut out. So it's not only about race. So it's a matter of having these people who we get in these spots understand that there are some people who look like us, but they are not for us. Their interests are not our interests. So when we talk about consciousness, my consciousness is I hope being increased every day, even to this day. I'm still trying to figure it out.
What is racism?
What is racism? Well, let me take a step back. Let's talk about what's racial discrimination, and then we'll talk about. So racial discrimination is some act or some actions on behalf of whoever that deleterious or negatively impacts a specific racial group, right? So we can talk about what I do. Let's talk about cocaine, crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. Powder cocaine, in 1986, we passed laws that punish infractions 100 times more harshly than powder cocaine. Now, when we look at those laws are really harsh. You are required to go to jail for a minimum of 5 years. That's a fact. 80% of the people convicted under those laws were and are black, right? But black people don't use crack cocaine more than their white counterparts. And so when you have this sort of selective enforcement of the law or prosecution of these people, that's racial discrimination. That's what we mean when we say racial discrimination. We think about stop and frisk in the city. Disproportionately, black and brown people are stopped and frisked. That's racial discrimination. Now, let's think about a racist. What is a racist? The people who passed those laws, the crack powder laws in the United States, were the U.S. Congress. There were black people who voted for those laws. There was 16 of the 20 Congressional Black Caucus members voted for those laws. So the question becomes, were they racist for voting for those laws? Of course not. They're not racist by simply voting for these laws that happen to have this impact. Now, when we bring it to their attention that our policy is having this negative impact selectively on this group, and then they have an opportunity to do something about it or not. They chose in 1995, the Congress, as well as Bill Clinton, the president, they chose not to do anything about it, even though we all knew it was negatively impacting this group, black people. They are racist. Bill Clinton, the Congress, on that case, they were racist. That's what we call racist in the city, in New York. Stop and frisk, the policy, the impact that the policy was having on black people, black and brown people, was brought to the attention of the mayor, Bloomberg, at the time. He chose to defend the policy as opposed to take action that would lessen this negative impact on this community. We call him a racist. That's a racist. And so that's what I prefer to talk about when we talk about racism and that sort of thing. Let's talk about what's racial discrimination. What's a racist? Who's a racist? It's not the guy with the white sheet. It's not the one who calls you a nigger. That's really remedial. That's 1927. That's not now. Right now, we have a lot of sort of racial discrimination going on and racist, but we're looking for the guy with the white sheet and the one who calls you a nigger.
But I think maybe that's easier for people to try to understand, to wrap their heads around when it comes to just that simple definition of somebody calling you a nigger or disrespecting you because you're black.
That's not going to get us to where we need to improve our society. That is a distraction, and that wastes our time. And we focus on where the real actions are, where the real injustices occur. I mean, we can think about now in the city, the brother Eric Garner, who was choked to death in Staten Island. This disproportionately happens to black people. That's racial discrimination. And the people who support such policies in these police, they are racist. That's where the action is. They're not wearing white sheets. They're even black in some cases. And that's where the action is. As when I think about my children, my boys, my male children, I worry about that. And that's more important than somebody calling them a nigger. You know, you can call me a nigger, but if you can't control whether I have a job or you're not going to kill me, I don't care about that. I mean, people have called me a lot worse things than that.
How's the relationship between you and your mom now?
That was about the same when I wrote the book. It's good, but strained at some level. When you think, we can put my father in the same sort of category here. When you think about the book is deeply revealing. I reveal a lot of sort of things about my own sort of wretchedness, if you will, as well as some of my family members, you know, and my mom and dad are certainly a part of that whole thing. And you know, we've talked about these things and I've tried to explain, and they were polite, and they yeah, we get it, we understand. But you know, it's a difficult thing, you know, because we all screw up. This is the point that I'm trying to make in the book. It's like none of us are perfect, and none of us should have to act like we're perfect. And if we stop acting as if we're perfect, we might actually be able to improve the lives of people who come after us, so they don't have some psychiatric illness because they are trying so hard to be this image, this perfect person that they think that they should be. And so when you do what I did with this book,
you really get deep in that book.
Yeah, so when you do those kinds of things, you know, sometimes you hurt people's feelings. I certainly didn't mean to hurt my mom and dad's feelings, and then we've talked, but you know, it's difficult.
I mean, I think that especially in the black community, there's a lot of things that happen within our growing up experiences and our family experiences that a lot of times we just don't want to talk about. You know, they're bad, but I don't know if that's, like you said, one of the coping mechanisms that we use.
Yeah, I mean, we all, including me, we all want to present the best possible face forward that we can. And sometimes it's not the most objective view. But that's okay. I mean, it's okay to not be perfect. And that's what I'm trying to help people understand. You don't have to be perfect. In fact, I don't want to hang out with no perfect people, because then you might require me to be perfect. I don't want that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Right. And so if people understood that, you know, we might have a better place to live.
How hard is it for you when you're trying to, you know, educate people about, you know, drugs and information and stuff like that, for actually people to be responsive to what you'll have to say? How hard is that to get people to listen?
Well, it's getting easier, but it's difficult, right? I mean, when you write a book that has been popular as this book has been, it's kind of opened up some space that wasn't there before, and that's good. But it's still difficult, because you have to understand that many of the people who are particularly leaders in our society, they came up in the era of this is your brain on drugs. You know, the frying pan, the egg, and that's such misinformation, but they thought that they actually knew something about drugs. And whenever you are trying to educate people on something they thought they knew something about, think about it. You're saying to them that knowledge that you have That's rubbish. Get rid of that, and you got to learn something new. Who wants to learn something new? You know, there's only a select group of people who actually want to learn new things, and you're telling them to get rid of something that they worked hard to learn. Not any good. Now you have to work hard to learn this new thing. I get that, and so it can be difficult. It's becoming a lot easier as the book becomes more popular. Now they will listen. There were times when people were like, a dreadlocked black guy talking about drugs are not as bad as we've been told. Give me a break. Now they say, all right, this is Dr. Carl Hart. I saw him on TV. I saw him on Fox News. And Bill O'Reilly is my man, so maybe I should listen to him. Or I saw him on Tavis Smiley. Tavis is my man. Or Bill Maher, something like that. So when you have that sort of exposure, at least now people will listen.
Cool. Where can people find the book?
People can find the book. They can go to my website, drcarlhart, all one word.com, drcarlhart.com. You can go there, and you can also just do, if you want to support the big sort of conglomerates like Amazon.com, you can get it from there. Or probably more important to support your local bookstores. Those folks can get it as well.
How's the book doing? I mean, as far as its selling is,
well,
how's it doing?
I have to tell you, man, every author, you ask the author, how's the book doing? I have never seen an author say, well, man, it's not doing as well as I thought. so you know what my answer is. It's like, the book is doing fantastically well, man.
I mean, I'm an author. I write books. I get on the subway and sell my books, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we can get on the subway together. We can get on the subway and sell some books together, man.
Right on, man. I'm with you.
Listen, man, it's a pleasure, man. I want everybody to read your book, man. And thank you very much for coming on the show. This is another great segment. You're watching Straight Talk. I'm your host, Randy Kearse. We've been talking to Dr. Carl Hart, and he's
neuropsychopharmacologist.
Yeah, that's what he is. That's what he is. I know that what he does is very important, and I hope you go out and get this book. It's a very good book. Talk to you later. Peace.